The first intercept came in at 0314 station time, a ghost ping so brief the automated filters had already flagged it as instrument noise by the time analyst Vethsaran arrived for her shift. She almost agreed. The signal lasted 4 milliseconds, bounced off the magnetosphere of a dead moon orbiting the fourth planet of an unregistered system, and carried no identification header, no origin vector, no destination trace, just the faintest electromagnetic signature, a shape she recognized the way a retired doctor recognizes a patient's limp from across a crowded market. She had studied human warship emissions for 11 years. She knew that shape. She pulled up the Directorate's sealed archive and cross-referenced the signature against every human hull on record. The match algorithm ran for 40 seconds, an eternity in a system built to answer in fractions of one, and then returned a single result, flagged in red, INS Reckoner, hull class, Terran strike cruiser modified configuration, last confirmed position, the Harrow Station debris field, 19 months and 14 days prior. Last confirmed status destroyed. Veth sat with that for a long time. The Reckoner had not been destroyed. The Reckoner had been watching. She pulled the full case file in the hour before her supervisor arrived. Moving through layers of clearance she had spent 4 years accumulating precisely for mornings like this. The archive's timeline was clinical, precise, stripped of everything the Karathi Signals Directorate deemed emotionally irrelevant. It recorded facts, fleet coordinates, weapons discharges, hull destructions, casualty estimates. It recorded outcomes. It did not record what those outcomes meant to the people on the other side of them. Veth had learned to read what the archive left out. 19 months and 14 days ago, the Galactic Sovereignty's 7th Analytical Fleet, 340 warships organized into 6 combat divisions, commanded by Fleet Admiral Thesson Voru, had arrived at Harrow Station to enforce Compliance Directive 7 Gamma. The directive was simple, as the Sovereignty's directives always were. The independent human colony at Harrow was operating a communications array that fell within the Sovereignty's mapped exclusion zone. They had been given 18 months to relocate. They had not. The 7th Analytical Fleet was sent to demonstrate that the Sovereignty's timelines were not suggestions. The archive recorded the operation's duration as 4 hours and 11 minutes. It did not record what 4 hours and 11 minutes looked like from inside. Harrow Station had housed 23,000 people. The Terran battle group assigned to the sector, 3 ships, the EDS Resolute, the EDS Parnell, and the INS Reckoner, had arrived 47 minutes into the operation, after the station's distress beacon was already fragmenting. The archive noted, with administrative precision, that the battle group had been ordered to stand down by the Sovereignty's Fleet Command on grounds that the compliance operation was a civil enforcement matter and Terran military presence constituted an unlawful interference with interspecies governance. The Resolute and the Parnell had stood down. The archive noted that the Reckoner had not responded to the Sovereignty's communications. It also noted in a separate file, cross-referenced and buried under 6 layers of diplomatic correspondence, that the Reckoner's captain, Commander Eris Thane, 18 years in the Terran Defense Corps, decorated in 4 engagements, had watched the Sovereignty's weapons remove Harrow Station from the operational charts and had said nothing, had not fired, had not retreated, had simply gone dark. The battle group's after-action report, filed by the Resolute's executive officer, listed the Reckoner as lost, presumed destroyed by Sovereignty fire during the operation's final phase. That presumption, Veth now understood, had been exactly what Commander Thane intended. She spent the next 6 hours pulling intercepts. Not just the ghost ping from 0314, but everything in the Directorate's buffer going back 8 months. Every piece of signal traffic that had been auto-filed, processed, and shelved without a second look. The signals analysts who had touched these files before her were competent. They were also looking for human warships in the places human warships were supposed to be, in Terran space, in the treaty corridors, along the recognized transit lanes. Nobody had been looking for a human warship in the Sovereignty's interior. Nobody had considered that the Reckoner might have spent 19 months threading itself through the Sovereignty's own sensor net. There were 43 ghost pings. She mapped them. The Reckoner had not been running blind. The pattern was not random flight. It was methodical traversal. The ship had moved through the sovereignty's interior networks the way water moves through cracked stone, along the lines of least resistance, through the gaps between sensor arrays, pausing in the electromagnetic shadows of gas giants and binary star systems where the interference was thick, enough to swallow a strike cruiser's passive signature. Each ping was a point of contact, a moment where the reckoner had been close enough to something for even its passive hull to leave a trace. Veth mapped those contact points against the Sovereignty's fleet movement records. Then she had to sit down. The 7th Analytical Fleet had been reorganized after Harrow Station. It was standard sovereignty doctrine. After a successful compliance operation, the participating divisions were rotated, reassigned, and redistributed across the Sovereignty's operational zones. The 6 combat divisions of the 7th Fleet had been split and spread across 11 different systems, some as far as 40 light-years from the original engagement area. The Sovereignty's strategic analysts considered this good practice. It prevented the political difficulties that arose when a named fleet became associated with a named incident. What it had not prevented, what it had been incapable of preventing, was the reckoner following them. Division 3 had been reassigned to patrol duties in the Sarkin corridor. The ghost ping nearest their posted position was 63 days old. Division 3 had reported a navigation anomaly in their patrol zone 59 days ago and had not transmitted since. Veth pulled their last known position. She pulled the reckoner's intercept point nearest to them. She calculated the distances and the timelines. Then she very carefully composed herself, because what she was looking at was not a missing fleet division. What she was looking at was a sequence, a schedule, a list. Commander Thane was working through them one by one. Here is where the dual threat of it becomes necessary, where the analyst's reconstruction and the ship's actual passage exist in parallel, because the reckoner's story cannot be told entirely from signal intercepts and position pings. There were things Veth Soran could only infer, things she built from fragments. But the fragments were precise, and analysts who spend long enough with a subject learn to read the shape of an absence. This is what she pieced together. 63 days before Veth's shift began, the reckoner had held position in the gravity shadow of a brown dwarf star designated HR 7741 in sovereignty charts. 3 million kilometers from the outer patrol boundary of Division 3's assigned zone. Holding position at that range, in that shadow, at the reckoner's observed power output, near zero, would have made the ship invisible to Division 3's standard sensor array. The Sovereignty built excellent sensors. They built them to specifications, known hull configurations, known emission profiles, known behavioral patterns. A Terran strike cruiser operating at near-zero power output, stationary in a gravitational interference zone, did not match any behavioral pattern the Sovereignty had classified as threatening. Division 3 had been watching for things that moved like threats. The reckoner had not moved. What Division 3 had seen, in the 14 minutes before their communications went silent, was a standard gravity anomaly ping from their navigational instruments. Not a ship, a gravity event, a momentary densification of local space-time that their instruments flagged as a minor survey notation and their duty officer logged as instrument fluctuation and scheduled for maintenance review. It was not instrument fluctuation. At near-zero power output, a Terran strike cruiser's modified gravitic drive emitted a signature that fell below the Sovereignty's threat classification threshold. At near-zero power output, the Reckoner was not a warship. It was weather. It was the background hum of the universe's ordinary physics. Division 3's duty officer had 43 seconds between the navigation alert and the moment the Reckoner came to combat power. 43 seconds is not enough time to do anything useful. The Reckoner fired on Division 3's command vessel first, then the flanking escorts, then the patrol cruisers in formation around them. The engagement lasted 4 minutes and 7 seconds. Veth calculated this from the last received transmission timestamp and the earliest seismic detection of the weapon's discharges by a survey satellite 0.7 light minutes away. 4 minutes and 7 seconds for Division 3, 57 ships, 18,400 crew. 4 minutes, 7 seconds. Division 3 had numbers. The Reckoner had remembered Harrow Station. Veth worked backward from there. She had the endpoint, Division 3, and she had the beginning, the Harrow Station date. She had 43 ghost pings and a 19-month timeline. She began matching pings to Sovereignty Division positions, to unexplained communications blackouts, to the navigation anomalies and signal degradation events that the Sovereignty's administrative apparatus had filed away as infrastructure problems and equipment malfunctions. Every navigation anomaly, every unexplained blackout, every filed maintenance report that had never been traced to a hardware fault because the hardware was fine. Division 6 disappeared 14 months ago in the outer rim of the Sovereignty's 8th administrative sector. Veth found 2 ghost pings in proximity to their last known position. She found a seismic detection record from a mineral survey drone 1 light minutes away, timestamped 11 months ago, that showed a weapons discharge signature consistent with a Terran strike cruiser's primary rail battery. Division 1, the flagship division, Thesson Voru's personal command, still active as of Veth's current records. Still in operation at a classified coordinate she had clearance to access. She accessed it. She found 3 ghost pings within 8 light hours of their position, the most recent 41 hours ago. She looked at the timestamp on the most recent ping. She looked at the timestamp on her current shift start. She did arithmetic that was very simple and arrived at a conclusion that was very cold. The Reckoner was not running. It had never been running. It had been moving through a list, efficient, patient, silent, and it was almost at the end of that list. The Sovereignty's 7th Analytical Fleet, the 3 and 40 ships that had removed Harrow Station from the operational charts in 4 hours and 11 minutes, had been reduced over 19 months to 1 remaining division. 1 command group, 47 ships under Admiral Voru's direct command, stationed at coordinates that Veth now knew the Reckoner had pinged 41 hours ago. She needed to warn them. She opened a priority channel to the Sovereignty liaison desk. She paused. She looked at the archive entry for Harrow Station. She looked at the casualty estimate. 23,000. She looked at the diplomatic correspondence where the Sovereignty's foreign affairs apparatus referred to the compliance operation as a legal enforcement action and the destruction of the station as an administrative outcome. She looked at the Terran government's formal protest, which the Sovereignty had acknowledged and filed and never responded to. She looked at Division 3's last transmission, a navigation anomaly report, logged by a duty officer who had been doing his job, who had been dead 3 minutes later. She sat with the priority channel open for a very long time. Then she sent the alert. She did not know, when she sent it, what was already happening. The Reckoner had been at combat power for 37 minutes by the time Veth's alert reached the Sovereignty liaison desk. Commander Thane had not waited for 41 hours. The 41-hour-old ping had been the last passive contact before the Reckoner went to its approach position, 4 hours out from Division 1's formation in a nebular gas band dense enough to attenuate active sensors. It had spent 31 of those hours closing the distance, silently, at a velocity profile that matched the gas band's normal thermal convection patterns closely enough that Division 1's perimeter sensors would flag it as atmospheric disturbance. The Reckoner had been a student of the Sovereignty's sensor doctrine for 19 months. It had read that doctrine the way a surgeon reads anatomy, not to admire it, but to understand exactly where to cut. Division 1 was 47 ships. The Sovereignty's flagship formation was configured in a layered defensive sphere, a command vessel at center, 2 rings of escort cruisers, an outer screen of sensor pickets positioned at 200,000-kilometer intervals. The sensor pickets existed to prevent exactly what was happening. They were the outer immune system of the fleet. They would detect an approaching threat at their sensor horizon, approximately 340 zuzod kilometers, and relay the alert to the command vessel with enough warning for the fleet to reconfigure its defensive geometry. The sensor pickets relied on active scan pulses every 40 seconds. Between pulses, a ship moving at a carefully calculated velocity through the nebular gas band would advance approximately 6,000 kilometers. The Reckoner had been counting pulses since it entered the band. When the sensor picket on the formation's dorsal quadrant completed its pulse cycle and the 40-second window opened, the Reckoner crossed the 340,000-kilometer threshold at full military power. It was inside the sensor picket's range before the next pulse. It was inside the escort ring before the picket's alarm reached the command vessel. It was 40,000 kilometers from Admiral Voru's flagship when Division 1's combat station sounded. 47 ships turned to meet it. The sovereignty's military doctrine was built around the principle of overwhelming response. No single threat, however capable, could survive concentrated fire from a force of this scale. Division 1's weapons officers ran the calculations in the first 8 seconds. One hull, one Terran strike cruiser, modified configuration, known armor rating, known weapons loadout. The numbers were comforting. They had 47 ships to its one. They had more firepower than the Reckoner could absorb by a factor of 63. What the weapons officers' calculations did not account for was the Reckoner's 19 months of modification. Commander Thane had not spent 19 months simply navigating. The ship had passed through 3 independent Terran resupply caches, positioned before Harrow Station, built into rock formations and asteroid fields across the sector for emergencies, and had used every cache fully. The weapon system's modifications alone had required 7 weeks and 2 dead caches of raw material. The defensive geometry changes had required 11 weeks more. The Reckoner that Division 1's sensors were reading was not the hull that the Sovereignty's archive had on file. The archive had a 3-year-old technical specification. What it did not have was the ship's current configuration. What it did not have was any record of the Reckoner at all, because the Reckoner was officially destroyed. Division 1 opened fire. The first 2 salvos, 340 discrete weapons discharges across multiple targeting solutions, scored 11 hull contacts and consumed 3% of Division 1's ordnance reserve. The Reckoner did not stop. It did not slow. It rotated 11 degrees on its long axis and fired once, on a vector that the weapons officer on Division 1's command vessel would have called statistically impossible. The shot was not aimed at a ship. It was aimed at the spatial coordinate that, given Division 1's defensive geometry, represented the intersection point of their formation's mutual fire coverage. The round detonated at that coordinate. The detonation was not a weapon, it was a navigational tool. It generated a plasma wave that forced Division 1's outer escort ring to disperse to avoid the interference bloom, which opened a 2.3-kilometer gap in their overlapping fire coverage on a bearing of 017 by 44. The Reckoner went through the gap at E.31c, at that velocity inside the escort ring, with the Sovereignty's ships unable to fire on the bearing without hitting their own formation. The Reckoner needed 4 minutes and 22 seconds to reach Voru's command vessel. It took 3. The alert Veth sent reached the Sovereignty liaison desk at 0917 station time. The duty officer at the liaison desk escalated it to the night watch supervisor. The supervisor escalated it to the sector communications hub. The sector hub relayed it to Division 1's communication officer. Division 1's communication officer did not acknowledge. Division 1's communication officer was dead. The Sovereignty's sector emergency notification system attempted to raise Division 1 44 times in the next 17 minutes. It received no response from any of the 47 ships. It received, instead, a single telemetry packet from the formation's automated navigational beacon, a standard registry ping, the type that warships emit every 90 seconds as a positional record, regardless of crew action. The ping identified 47 ships by hull registration number, bearing, velocity, and power status. 46 registrations read. Power status, offline. The 47th Hull Registry TTC-70's Reckoner, status, destroyed. Read, power status, nominal, velocity 0.4 c, bearing, 117 by 220. Destination, unregistered. Veth was looking at that transmission when it arrived at the directorate. She looked at it for a long time. She looked at the 46 offline registrations, at the numbers she had spent 12 hours mapping, at the 19 months of ghost pings and navigation anomalies and unexplained blackouts that she had assembled into a picture of something the Sovereignty had no category for. A warship that was not in any active roster. A warship that had been methodically, patiently dismantling a fleet that the Sovereignty had spent 19 months believing was safe, because the ship assigned to stop them had been listed as destroyed. She looked at Commander Thane's personnel file. The photograph was 11 years old. It showed a woman who looked like she had been awake for a long time even then. She thought about Harrow Station. She thought about 23,000 people and about what it costs to watch a compliance aspiration from 47 minutes distance and understand precisely what you are watching and be unable to stop it. She thought about the administrative outcome. She thought about the diplomatic correspondence. She thought about what it would take a person to go dark for 19 months, to become weather, to become a navigation anomaly, to spend 19 months moving through the sovereignty's own interior like something the universe had simply always contained, unremarkable, unnamed, patient as stone. The last transmission from the reckoner carried no message, no final log entry, no declaration, just the telemetry packet, the hull registration, the destination field that read unregistered. Unregistered meant the destination was not in any sovereignty chart. Unregistered meant it was in Terran space. The reckoner was going home. Veth filed her report at 11:04 station time. It ran to 47 pages and contained everything she had found. The ghost pings, the position maps, the timeline reconstruction, the weapons discharge detections, the fleet division loss records cross-referenced against the reckoner's inferred position at each relevant date. It was a precise and thorough piece of analytical work. She had been meticulous with it. She had not allowed any personal element to intrude on the methodology. The report contained no recommendation. Her supervisor, who arrived for his shift while she was still finishing it, read the executive summary and looked at her across the desk and said, "You found this in tonight's intercept traffic?" She told him it had taken about 12 hours. He read further. He said, "They are going to want to know why you didn't send the alert sooner," she said. "I sent the alert when I had enough data to be certain." He looked at the timestamp on the alert and the timestamp on the final telemetry packet from Division 1, and he did not say anything else about the timing. The report went up the chain. It reached the sovereignty's senior diplomatic contact within the hour, accompanied by an automated priority flag. The sovereignty's response came back in 40 minutes, which was faster than Veth had expected. Typically, the sovereignty's administrative apparatus moved slowly, with great deliberate dignity, at the pace of institutions that have never experienced anything they could not classify and file. This they could not classify. The response was a terse two-sentence acknowledgement. The events described had been noted. The sovereignty was reviewing the matter. Veth read those two sentences and thought about 38 months of diplomatic notes the Karathi Directorate had filed regarding Harrow Station. She thought about the sovereignty's original acknowledgement of the Terran protest, received and filed. She thought about the administrative outcome. She thought, yes. You are reviewing the matter now, she thought. The reckoner made a list. You were on it, and now you are not. And the one ship you should have been afraid of for 19 months is not in your space anymore, and there is nothing in your archive that tells you whether it will come back, and there is nothing in your doctrine that prepared you for a threat you had already filed as destroyed. She thought, Commander Thane understood something about the sovereignty that the sovereignty's own analytical apparatus had never understood about itself. The sovereignty cataloged threats, it classified them, assigned them threat ratings, established protocols. It was extraordinarily good at responding to what it expected. What it could not do, what it had never learned to do in its 400-year operational history, was respond to the thing that had already decided it was not a threat, that had decided to become, instead, a consequence. The reckoner crossed back into Terran space at a coordinate 53 light-years from Harrow Station's former position. The crossing was detected by a Terran long-range listening post at 13:17 station time, 3 hours after Veth's report went up the chain, 13 hours after her shift had begun. The listening post's automated system flagged the contact and ran the hull signature match. The result came back in 4 seconds. INS reckoner, status active, power output, standard transit course inbound to the Tyraneth repair facility. The listening post's duty officer, a young signal specialist named Orvin, looked at the status flag beside the hull registration. The flag read, registry status, destroyed. He looked at the active contact. He looked at the status flag again. He opened a direct line to his watch supervisor and said, I have a contact that doesn't make sense. His supervisor pulled the feed. She looked at it. She had been in signals work for 22 years, and she was very good at not showing what she was thinking. She said, "Log it as active." "Change the registry status to operational," he said. "It's been listed as destroyed for 19 months. She said it was wrong. "Change it." She looked at the course heading. The Tyraneth Repair Facility, the nearest fully equipped dockyard in that sector. And she thought about what a ship that had been operating for 19 months without resupply or maintenance would look like when it came in. She thought about the crew. She thought about the kind of silence that follows 19 months of being somewhere nobody was looking. She picked up her own line and called the facility commander at Tyraneth. She told him a ship was inbound. She told him to have the receiving bay clear and the engineering team standing by and the medical staff ready and the debriefing rooms prepared. She told him the ship would need all of it. She told him not to send a standard hailing protocol when it came in range. She told him to just open the channel and leave it open and say nothing and wait. She told him the crew will talk when they're ready. At Tyraneth, the Reckoner dropped from transit speed at 1804 station time and came in on approach at a velocity so controlled, so precisely calibrated to the facility's docking geometry, that the bay traffic coordinator later told people it was the smoothest approach she had, ever logged, not mechanical, not automated pilot smooth. Human smooth, the particular precision of someone who had been doing something for a very long time and had become very good at it and was now doing it for the last time with full attention, making it right. The bay doors opened. The Reckoner came in. It was not the same ship that had gone dark 19 months ago. The hull showed everything. The armor plating had been patched in at least 11 distinct locations with materials that did not match the original specification. Different alloy grades, different surface treatment, different weathering signatures that told the engineering team, when they looked at them, that each patch had been applied at a different time over a long operational period. There were scorch marks on the port side running 70 meters along the secondary hull, marks from energy weapons that had not been there in the pre-Harrow configuration files. The sensor array housings on the dorsal spine were gone, removed entirely, the housings sealed with temporary plating already beginning to stress fracture along the weld seams. The weapons bays on the forward ventral mount had been reconfigured with mounting brackets no Terran Navy technical specification had ever filed. The engineering team would spend 3 weeks going through the Reckoner and finding things that were not in any specification. Modification after modification, improvisation after improvisation, the accumulated ingenuity of 19 months of autonomous operation by a crew of 2111 who had been maintaining and modifying a strike cruiser in combat conditions with no dockyard support and no supply chain and no one who knew where they were. The crew came off last after the ship was secure and the bay was sealed. 41 of them were carried off on stretchers, not dead, but exhausted in ways that 19 months of adrenaline and close calls and long silences accumulate into, the kind of exhaustion that does not register as pain until you stop moving and somewhere safe finally surrounds you. The rest walked off under their own power. Most of them were very thin. Most of them did not speak immediately. They stood in the bay and looked at the lights and the space and the people and the absence of threat in the air, and they breathed. Commander Aristhain was the last one off. She came down the ramp at the precise pace of someone who was not going to be hurried, a woman who had spent 19 months operating on her own schedule in spaces that no one had been watching, and she was not going to be rushed now just because she had arrived somewhere. The facility commander, standing at the base of the ramp, had prepared remarks. He did not deliver them. He looked at her face and understood that she did not need his remarks. He offered his hand. She looked at him for a moment, then she took it. He said, "Welcome back." She said nothing. She looked at the bay, at the Reckoner, sitting in its berth with the scorch marks and the mismatched plating and the sensor housings gone, the ship that should not have existed for 19 months and had existed anyway, that had gone through the sovereignty's interior like weather, like a navigation anomaly, like the accumulated cost of a 4-hour, 11-minute compliance operation coming due. She looked at it for a long time. Then she walked toward the debriefing rooms, and the facility commander walked beside her, and the bay hummed with the sound of the engineering teams beginning their work. The debriefing lasted 11 days. Veth did not attend it personally. She was signals analysis, not field operations, and the Reckoner's crew fell under Defense Intelligence's jurisdictions for the formal reconstruction of events. But the Directorate received the transcripts. She read every page of them, late into the night shifts, alone at her workstation with a cup of something warm going cold beside her keyboard, because she kept forgetting it was there. The crew's testimony was specific in ways she had not anticipated. She had spent 12 hours reconstructing the Reckoner's 19-month passage from the outside, from intercepts and pings and the negative space, of things that had not transmitted when they should have. She had seen the shape of it. The testimony filled the shape in. The first 3 months after Harrow Station had been the worst, according to the accounts that found their way into the transcripts. Not the hardest in terms of technical difficulty. The ship systems were still in good order then. The resupply caches were still full. The crew was still running on the kind of focused, controlled intensity that operational stress produces when the stress has not yet become weight. The worst because of what they were carrying. 23,000 people. The specific number. The Reckoner's signals officer, a specialist named Jan Dory, had spent 3 weeks after Harrow Station going through the station's civilian communications archive. She had downloaded it during the 47-minute transit before the station went silent on reflex as part of standard pre-engagement intelligence protocol. The archive contained 2.3 million messages, personal communications, families talking to families, work records, the ordinary accumulation of 23,000 people living in a place and expecting to continue living in it. Dory had not intended to read them. She had flagged the archive for intelligence review and gone back to her station. She had started reading them 2 days later and had not been able to stop for a week. The debriefing transcript recorded her account without judgment. The debriefing officer asked whether the archive's contents had affected the crew's operational capacity. Dory said, "We were more careful after that." The debriefing officer asked what she meant. She said, "We were very careful not to make mistakes." Commander Thane's testimony was the longest. It was also the most methodical. Not in a defensive way, not in the careful, measured way of someone managing what they reveal, but in the way of someone who had been keeping extremely precise records for 19 months and saw no reason to be imprecise now. She walked the debriefing officers through the first 3 months, the decision to go dark, the route selection, the first resupply cache. She walked them through the modification program, which systems they had upgraded, and when, what the caches had provided, and what the crew had fabricated from onboard materials, how they had prioritized given the constraints of operating without a dockyard. She said, "We knew we had 1 pass at each division. We could not afford a misfire." The debriefing officer said, "Can you elaborate on the selection sequence?" She said, "The 7th Fleet was reorganized into 6 divisions after the compliance operation. We had positional data on 4 of them from signals intelligence gathered in the first month. The other 2 required more time to locate. Division 2 was the hardest. They were reassigned to a classified coordinate that was not in any open registry. It took 7 months to find them. 7 months. Moving through the Sovereignty's interior, threading sensor nets and gravity shadows, looking for a fleet division at a classified coordinate that no open registry held. Veth had found the ghost pings for that period, a cluster of contacts in the Sovereignty's deep interior near the administrative core, in systems so heavily monitored that the Reckoner's presence pressed there represented something close to the impossible. She had looked at those pings and understood that whatever Commander Thane had done to keep the ship invisible in monitored space for 7 months was beyond the category of skill. It was the outcome of a specific, irreducible decision. We are doing this, and we will not be stopped by anything the Sovereignty places in our way. The debriefing officer asked, "Were there engagements you chose not to pursue?" Commander Thane said, "Yes." She described 3 Sovereignty patrol vessels that had come within detection range during the transit periods. Individual picket ships in positions that offered clear firing solutions. Each time, she had calculated the operational cost of the engagement, the noise it would create, the alert it would trigger in the Sovereignty's internal monitoring network, the risk it posed to the larger sequence, and each time she had declined. The list was the objective. Everything else was a variable to be managed. Veth read that section of the transcript twice. She thought about the sovereignty patrol vessels, the crews on those ships who had never known, would never know how close they had come. She thought about what it means to be moving through someone's space for 19 months as a thing they cannot see, choosing who to strike and who to pass, maintaining that discipline across that span of time with 211 people depending on each decision. She thought about Harrow Station. She thought, Commander Thane chose exactly as precisely as the compliance operation had chosen, except that she chose with 19 months of patience and a complete list and a ship that had been modified beyond anything the Sovereignty's archive could recognize. The Sovereignty had chosen efficiently. Commander Thane had chosen carefully. The difference was in what happened afterward. Division 2's account, as reconstructed from Sovereignty intercepts and debris field analysis, conducted by a Terran survey vessel 3 months after the engagement, was the most technically demanding of the 6. Veth received the survey report as part of the case file's second tranche, transmitted from Field Intelligence 6 weeks after her initial filing. She read it front to back, not allowing herself to skim. Division 2 had been at a classified coordinate for 8 months when the Reckoner found them. They were positioned in the gravitational stable point between 2 medium-gravity bodies, a binary system with no habitable planets, no strategic significance, no reason for any commercial or survey vessel to be in the area. It was, by Sovereignty doctrine, a nearly perfect position. The gravitational geometry complicated approach vectors, the electromagnetic interference from the binary pair's interaction zone attenuated active sensors, and the absence of any traffic made any anomalous contact immediately visible. The problem with that position, from Division 2's perspective, was that it was also a perfect position for an observing vessel to hold without being detected. The same gravitational geometry that complicated approach vectors from the expected directions created a specific set of stable orbits on the far side of the primary body. An object in those orbits would be invisible to Division 2 sensors, screened by the planetary mass, and would be able to observe the fleet's patrol patterns and communication schedules in detail over an extended period. Division 2 had been at that coordinate for 8 months. The Reckoner had been in the stable orbit for 6 of them. Veth looked at that figure, 6 months in a stable orbit behind a planet, watching a fleet's patrol patterns, and felt something she could not name precisely. Not admiration, not horror, something more specific than either. She thought about the 211 people on the Reckoner during those 6 months, running on minimal power in a stable orbit, watching and recording and waiting. 6 months of that. What it takes to maintain operational discipline for 6 months in those conditions, with the objective visible across the binary pair's interference zone, and nothing to do but wait for the moment to be exactly right. The Reckoner had engaged Division 2 in the 90-second window during the fleet's patrol cycle, when the 2 escort squadrons were at their maximum separation from the command vessel. The geometry had been precise. The weapons solution required a specific bearing that only existed during that interval. Miss the window and the fleet's overlapping fire coverage would close the gap before a follow-on solution could be computed. Division 2's command vessel survived the initial engagement. It took the Reckoner 8 minutes to run it down, the hardest 8 minutes of the entire operation, according to Commander Thane's testimony. The command vessel transmitted a distress call in the 3rd minute. The Sovereignty's nearest receiving station was 44 light minutes away. The distress call arrived too late to change anything. By the time the acknowledgement returned, Division 2 had been silent for 38 minutes. There was a hearing. There was always a hearing. Veth was called to testify at the second session, 5 weeks after the initial filing. The hearing was a Karathi internal matter, the Directorate reviewing its own procedures, examining the question of whether the signals that had allowed the Reckoner's passage to be reconstructed should have been detected and flagged sooner. It was not a criminal proceeding. It was the kind of institutional self-examination that large bureaucracies conduct when something has happened that they cannot classify. She testified for 3 hours. She was asked about the ghost pings. when they had entered the buffer, how the auto-filtering had processed them, whether the processing parameters should have caught the reckoner's signature sooner. She answered precisely. She described the methodology she had used to reconstruct the timeline. She described the specific signature characteristics that had allowed her to identify the contacts. She described the 40-second pulse window analysis that had permitted the Division 3 engagement timing to be calculated. She was not asked about the timing of her alert. She noticed that. The hearing panel's review noted in its eventual report that the ghost ping signature parameters had been within the autofilter's suppression thresholds, and that no analyst reviewing the raw buffer traffic during the relevant period could have been expected to identify the contacts from routine monitoring. The report recommended a parameter adjustment to the autofilter. It recommended enhanced cross-referencing protocols for signals matching ship registrations in destroyed status. It recommended further analysis of the reckoner's passive emission profile to improve detection capability for future cases. It did not specify what a future case would look like. Beth thought, "There will not be a future case like this one," she thought. "This is not a repeatable event." The reckoner's passage was not a method, it was a consequence. You cannot write a detection protocol for a consequence. You cannot auto-filter for 19 months of patience and a list that someone has decided to complete regardless of what you put in the way. You can adjust your parameters and improve your cross-referencing, and none of it will matter the next time someone has decided to become weather. She submitted her testimony addendum and went back to her desk. Commander Thane's court inquiry, not a court-martial, but an inquiry, with a distinction the Terran Defense Corps' legal framework considered significant, concluded in its fourth week with a finding that Veth has since, read 4 times in the years since. The finding was careful. It acknowledged the events at Harrow Station in language that the sovereignty's diplomatic mission immediately objected to, noting that the language assigned responsibility in a manner inconsistent with the sovereignty's classification of the compliance operation as a legal enforcement action. The Terran Defense Corps acknowledged the objection and left the language unchanged. The inquiry's finding on Commander Thane was no actionable misconduct identified in the performance of duties pending further review. Further review did not find actionable misconduct. Commander Thane was placed on 6 months administrative leave. At the end of the 6 months, she was assigned to the Tyraneth facility as a vessel systems consultant, a position that kept her on the ground and away from a command. The Reckoner went into the Tyraneth dockyard for a full refit, 11 months of work to bring it back to specification, at which point it was reassigned to a patrol route in a sector far from the sovereignty's border. Veth knew all of this because she kept the case file open. She did not formally maintain it. It was not her file to maintain after the initial report, but she followed the updates as they moved through the Directorate's shared system, which they did for about 8 months before the case went quiet. She knew that Commander Thane had been given command of a small survey vessel 2 years after the inquiry, not a warship, a survey vessel operating in a region of space with no sovereignty presence and no strategic significance. She knew this because the posting notice came through the Directorate's personnel monitoring system, which tracked command assignments of officers with active security flags, and Commander Thane's file carried a flag that would not be cleared for a decade. She thought about that. A decade's flag on a personnel file, and a survey vessel posting, and the Reckoner on a patrol route somewhere, stripped of all its 19 months of modifications and returned to specification, carrying nothing in its hull memory of what it had been. She thought about the Sovereignty's archive, which now contained a record of the 7th Analytical Fleet's Harrow Station compliance operation and, filed separately under incident review, a note about the unexplained loss of 5 of its 6 combat divisions over a 19-month period attributed to causes under ongoing review. She thought, the Sovereignty reviewed it, they filed it, they moved on. She thought, that is what they do with things they cannot classify. 3 years and 2 months after Harrow Station, Veth Soran was promoted to senior analyst. The ceremony was brief, and afterward she sat in her new office, slightly larger than her old desk, with a window looking out onto a maintenance corridor, and looked at the window for a while. Her case files from the Reckoner investigation sat in the archive under her access credentials. They would stay there for 40 years per standard protocol. The 43 ghost pings, the position maps, the timeline reconstruction, the weapons discharge detections, the fleet division loss records, everything she had assembled in 12 hours and one night. She opened the file one more time, not to review it, just to look. She looked at the position map. 43 points scattered across the Sovereignty's interior, each one a moment where a ship that should not have been there had brushed against the universe's physics and left a trace. She looked at the timeline, 19 months compressed into a sequence of events, each engagement a line item. Division 6 at month 4, Division 4 at month 7, Division 2 at month 13, Division 5 at month 16, Division 3 at month 18, Division 1 at month 19. The 7th Analytical Fleet's 340 ships reduced over 19 months to nothing, and the Reckoner on its patrol route somewhere, carrying its hull serials and its refit specification and its crew complement and its entry in the Terran Defense Corps' registry. Status, active. She closed the file. She looked at the maintenance corridor outside her window. She thought about the Sovereignty's archive and about what it had catalogued as an administrative outcome, and about the particular way consequences have of outlasting the systems that produce them. She thought about Commander Thane on her survey vessel in a quiet region of space, doing the ordinary work of mapping unmapped systems, the patient and careful and methodical work that takes a long time and requires a particular quality of attention that not everyone can maintain. She thought, some people are very good at patience, at becoming invisible, at deciding on a destination and moving toward it without deviation, through everything placed in the way until the thing is done. The Sovereignty had a file for everything. It had not had a file for that. She turned off the screen. She stood up. She walked out of her new office and down the maintenance corridor and back into the Directorate's main floor, where 30 analysts sat at their stations processing the day's signal traffic, flagging contacts, cross-referencing hull signatures, running matches against the registry of ships that were where they were supposed to be and doing what they were supposed to be doing. She thought, the registry is a record of what we believe. It is not a record of what is true, she thought. The Reckoner was listed as destroyed for 19 months. It was active for every one of them. She sat down at her station and opened the morning intercept buffer and began to work. Outside, in the unmapped distances between the Sovereignty's sensor nets and the quiet of deep space, the universe continued doing what it had always done, moving, adjusting, finding the paths of least resistance through whatever was placed in the way. Signal traffic washed across the band. Ghost pings rose and fell in the noise floor. The archive accumulated. The system logged what it could measure and filed what it could not and moved forward as systems do without asking whether what it had filed as resolved was actually finished. In the Sovereignty's administrative core, 47 case files sat in incident review, one for each ship of Division 1, cross-reference to the ongoing assessment of the Harrow Station compliance operation and its subsequent consequences. The consequences were described in precise administrative language. The language was accurate. It was complete in the ways that administrative language is always complete, which means it recorded what happened without recording what any of it cost. The 43 ghost pings sat in Veth's archive. The cost sat there too, quiet as signal noise, in the record of a ship that had spent 19 months becoming something no archive knew how to name. The Sovereignty's 7th Analytical Fleet had 340 ships when Harrow Station burned. It had one when the accounting was done. The Reckoner was active. It was home. It had completed its list. That was the whole of it. That was the end. 6 weeks after the hearing, Veth received a personal transmission, not through the Directorate system, through her private address, the one she had held for 9 years and given to perhaps 40 people. The sender identifier was a code she did not immediately recognize. She ran it through the Directorate's personnel cross-reference off the record, using a query format that left no log entry. It resolved to a Terran Defense Corps administrative routing number assigned to the Tyraneth facility's Vessel Consulting Office. The message contained no text. It contained a single audio file, 11 seconds long. She listened to it 3 times before she understood what she was hearing. It was ambient sound, the inside of a ship during normal operations. The low-frequency hum of a gravitic drive at cruise power, the soft cycling of a life support circulation system, a distant structural creak from a hull adjusting to thermal differential. Sounds she had cataloged in technical files for 11 years, sounds she had processed as data and classified and filed. She had never simply listened to them before. She sat in her apartment with the file playing on repeat, and she thought about what it meant that someone had sent this to her. She thought about Commander Thane in the Tyraneth consulting office, doing the ordinary ground-based work of reviewing hull specifications and maintenance protocols, and she thought about what a person hears when they have spent 19 months inside that sound. When it has been the texture of every day for a year and a half, the constant background against which everything else happened, she thought, this is what it sounds like to be the reckoner. She thought, she sent this so I would know. She deleted the transmission from her private system and sat in the quiet of her apartment for a long time. She thought about the 43 ghost pings. She thought about the 40-second pulse windows. She thought about Division 2 in their binary system's stable point, and the 6 months the reckoner had spent in orbit on the far side of the primary body, and what the gravitic drive hummed like during 6 months of holding position in a stable orbit. She had never thought of it as sound before. She had always thought of it as data. She thought. Commander Thane thought of it as something to go home from. The Sovereignty did formally close its incident review for 14 months. When the closure notice arrived, a 3-paragraph administrative document transmitted through the standard diplomatic channel, it contained no admission of error regarding the Harrow Station compliance operation. It contained a formal notation that the 7th Analytical Fleet's personnel losses during the relevant period had been reclassified from unknown causes to hostile engagement, attributed to an unidentified Terran military asset operating outside established treaty corridors. It contained a formal request that the Terran Defense Corps conduct an investigation into the unauthorized operation of military vessels in sovereignty space. The Terran Defense Corps acknowledged the request. It noted that the relevant investigation had already been conducted, that no actionable misconduct had been identified in the performance of duties, and that the matter was closed, pending no new evidence. The Sovereignty filed a formal objection. The Terran Defense Corps acknowledged the objection. The diplomatic exchange continued for another 4 months at diminishing pace before both parties ceased responding to each other's notes, which was the closest approximation of resolution that the situation was going to achieve. The Sovereignty's border monitoring protocols were revised. New sensor array deployments were scheduled for 11 systems along the Terran frontier. The specifications for the new arrays included enhanced detection parameters for low-power passive hull signatures, a direct response to the Reckoner's emission profile as reconstructed by Veth's report. She read the specification update when it came through the intelligence sharing channel and noted the parameter values. She noted how close they were to the Reckoner's actual profile. She noted the gap that remained. She filed the observation in a personal document she kept outside the Directorate's system and did not share with anyone. She thought, they are building for what they understand. They do not understand what they are building against. The Sovereignty's bureaucratic cataloging apparatus processed 3,000 incidents per year across its administrative zones. Most of them were routine, shipping disputes, boundary clarifications, resource allocation complaints from member polities, the ordinary administrative friction of an entity managing 400 inhabited systems across 11 sectors. The Harrow Station incident was logged, cross-referenced, filed, and placed in a category the Sovereignty's analytical staff designated as anomalous, resolved, meaning the incident had deviated from expected parameters but had been formally closed through established procedures. Anomalous resolved incidents were reviewed on a 5-year cycle. The Sovereignty's 5-year cycle for the Harrow Station file would come due at a point that was, from Veth's current position in time, still 4 years away. She did not know what the review would find. She did not know whether the administrative language would shift, whether the compliance operation would be reclassified, whether the diplomatic correspondence would be revisited. She did not know whether anyone in the sovereignty's apparatus had read the incident file carefully enough to understand what it actually documented. She suspected not. She suspected that the sovereignty's analysts had looked at the incident file and seen a category error event. A single Terran warship operating outside authorized parameters, achieving an anomalous operational outcome against dispersed fleet elements over an extended period, and had filed it as a capability assessment problem. They would update their threat models. They would revise their detection parameters. They would build new protocols for identifying low-signature contacts in their interior sensor network. They would not update the fundamental assumption that had made the entire sequence possible, that a ship listed as destroyed in the registry was destroyed. The Reckoner had been destroyed. It had been destroyed for 19 months in every archive and every fleet record and every diplomatic file the sovereignty possessed. And in all those months, while the sovereignty's apparatus was managing the Harrow Station incident through established resolution procedures, the destroyed ship had been working through a list. 6 divisions, 340 ships, 19 months. Not because the Reckoner was a weapon that could not be stopped, because it was a ship that had decided to do something and had done it with patience and precision and the specific quality of attention that comes from having watched 23,000 people become an administrative outcome and having had nothing to do about it for 47 minutes except watch and remember. Veth thought about that 47 minutes, the time between the Reckoner's arrival at the edge of the operation and the moment Harrow Station went silent. 47 minutes of watching, of recording, of knowing exactly what was happening and understanding exactly why the standing orders meant she could not fire, she thought. That is where the list came from. That is where 19 months of patience came from. 47 minutes of watching an administrative outcome be administered. She thought, I have spent 3 years studying what came after those 47 minutes. I have mapped 43 ghost pings and reconstructed 6 engagements and written 47 pages of analysis. I have done this with the same precision and the same methodical attention that the Reckoner applied to the other side of the same problem. She thought, we are the same kind of work. Hers and mine, patient, precise, looking at what the data means when you follow it all the way to the end. She opened the morning intercept buffer. She flagged 3 contacts for cross-reference, low signal, borderline threshold, the kind of readings that most analysts would let the autofilter suppress. She pulled them manually. She ran the hull signature match. All 3 resolved to known civilian vessels operating on logged routes. She filed them and moved on, but she had pulled them. She had looked. Because in 11 years of signals work and 3 years of living with the Reckoner file, she had learned one thing above all others, that the sovereignty's updated parameters and revised protocols would not protect them from. The things that mattered were always in the readings that looked like noise. She would keep looking. That was her list. Outside, the sovereignty's border sensor arrays continued their 40-second pulse cycles, scanning the space between their positions for contacts that matched their updated threat profiles, and found nothing that their specifications told them to worry about. The universe kept moving through the gaps.